Welcome. I lost my audio. Someone must have pulled down my fader. Hello, hello. Good evening. Confusion. If someone feels confused, they might feel like there's something wrong. You might feel like you're supposed to have a handle on things, you're supposed to be sorting things out, you're supposed to know what's going on, or supposed to somehow be in control of things. I think this is very typical in the way people think of things. Surprisingly, exactly the opposite is the case. Confusion is our native condition. It's impossible to pin down what this is. It's absolutely impossible to define exactly what anything consists of, or how it consists of that, or where it is, or any aspect of it whatsoever. But our normal human stance, the normal sort of consensus reality view, is we're supposed to be in denial of that. We're supposed to pretend we know what things are. We're supposed to have a handle on things. We're supposed to know who we are, what we are, what's going on, how it works, all of this. But it's all bravado. It's all bullshit. It's all manufactured. It's all churned into existence in our imagination. Typically we feel an urgency to have a handle on things, or at least to seem to have a handle on things, to have a convincing veneer that we have a handle on things. And typically we get very insecure if we feel like we don't. We start scrambling and feel, wait a minute, I'm confused, I don't know what's going on here, what's happening, where am I, what's going on? But in actuality, if you're honest, if you look very closely at your actual condition, you cannot know exactly what anything is. You can't know exactly how anything works. You can't know exactly what you are. You can't know exactly where you are. You can't know exactly how you got here. You can't know exactly where you're going. You can't know exactly why you're here. You can't know exactly what you're doing here. All of these are inscrutable. Yet it doesn't really matter, because we are fully engaged in the flow of our lives. Even if you don't know what you're doing it. Even if you don't know where you are, you're here. So all of this sort of orienting towards definition, orienting towards describability, orienting towards having a handle on things, is just posturing, it's just bravado, and in no way contributes to, or for that matter detracts from, our actual engagement with the process of life, with the process of actually living, with the process of actually being what we are, the way we are, none of which is describable, none of which is analyzable, none of which can be sorted out. In short, it's all intrinsically confusing. So confusion is actually our native condition. Confusion is actually what we are, where we are, and how we are. Well, I think I'll leave it at that. If you'd like to participate in discussion, there's a little microphone if you wouldn't mind speaking into it. That way people who are following along online will be able to hear anything you might have to say.
I've been wanting to ask...
Just a moment. It's a little low. I can't hear it.
I'll try again. No?
Well, she just needs to turn it up. Turn it way up.
So, okay, there it is. So what I've been wanting to ask for a while, sometimes when you've spoken, I've had this impression that you're conveying a situation which we assume or we can't know that experience is really happening, but that it might be, as you say, in our heads, if you want to put it that way. So I'm wondering whether it's kind of a situation where we can assume both, that there is a reality existent that is really happening in more the conventional way that we've always expected to think about reality. At the same time, it's sort of in a bubble in our heads also. So I guess, what's really sort of fascinated me when you were speaking in a direction that made me think that things don't exist the way we think they do, I kept wondering, why does he use stevia then? So why bother with worrying about one's blood sugar when reality doesn't exist or isn't as external as I would have always assumed it was? So that's just an example of where
right, I
just
it.
Wonder how much to engage with fears or
sure.
control of reality.
Yeah, there's several points there you brought up. Our thought bubble, our imagined or our conceptual or our internalized interpretation and narration of things, of interpretations of what we are and what's going on, exists within experience. But it is not what we think it is. The thought is not what we think it is. The world is real. It exists. It's not that it's not real, but it does not exist in the way that we think it does, because the way that it actually exists cannot be thought. It's too subtle, it's too elusive, it's too unresolvable to capture it in thought, to accurately describe it. So blood sugar exists, it's just not what we think it is. Stevia exists, it's just not what we think it is. Raw sugar exists, it's not what we think it is. It's delicious, though. The point is, nothing exists but reality. Anything that exists or that seems to exist is real. But it is not what you think it is. It's not what you can think it is. No matter how sophisticated and elaborate and brilliant and incredibly ingeniously constructed your analyses of anything is, or your understanding, your conceptualization of any sort of a system or whatever, or how it works is, it will be inaccurate. And that inaccuracy means that it doesn't actually apply. In other words, it's wrong. It's not a matter of reality being unreal. It's a matter of reality completely and utterly transcending what you may think it is.
How do you try to get at it then?
I'm sorry?
How do you try to get at it?
Well, you don't need to get at it. You are in it. Simply notice that the vast portion of your experience is present non-conceptually already. Vision is not a thought. Vision is not an idea. It's an experiential presence, let's call it. For example, thought is not an idea. Thought is an experiential presence, so on and so forth. So experience, i.e. the world and your life and your body and all these other things we ordinarily categorize as actual, are, in fact, non-conceptual actualities, or actuality, let's say. So you already are at it. You already are completely engaged with it. Just notice that simultaneously with that, there's a small portion of your attention that may be focused on narratives and analysis and descriptions, and notice that that small portion is small, relatively, and has absolutely nothing to do with actuality, even though it pretends to, even though it claims to, semantically. So, in other words, it's not a matter of changing anything whatsoever, it's a matter of noticing what it actually is, already, and has always been. all of the actuality of our experience has always been non-conceptually present. Experience is not a concept. We aren't thinking this into existence. It's just here, right? And all of its portions are just here. They're materially here. I mean, materially to whatever that means. They are actually here, actual presences. Non-conceptually, not as an idea, not as an analysis, and it turns out, in line with my opening talk, that what is here is actually unthinkable. It cannot be analyzed. It's not amenable to analysis. It's not amenable to accurate description due to a variety of aspects. It's too subtle, it's too nuanced, it's too unresolvable, it's too multidimensional, you can sort of throw all of these attributes at it that you can then experientially find something that correlates to some degree to these attributes. But again, these attributes themselves are unresolvable as to what they actually are. So it's sort of, the whole thing just sort of falls apart in mid-flight, let's say.
So I think I misunderstood you. Maybe a while back we were talking about creating the world in a way.
Uh-huh.
And you said something like, well, you create the world, including blah, blah, and I made that crack about being bad at physics. I don't know if you remember. So I was taking you to mean that each of us creates our own bubble?
No, it's more profound than that. What you really are is what is creating all this. What you really are is what's doing all this. But it's not, what you really are is not what you think it is. What you really are is vastly more than your personality, vastly more than your body-mind complex, vastly more than your history, so on and so forth. Vastly more than your human identity, than your human context. You are literally the reality of this system. And this system is doing all of this. Your system is doing your experience. And you are that system. And it's not like you need to become that system or something. It's just, it's already the case and always has been. So it's just, again, it's just a matter of noticing that that is the case, rather than needing to do anything about it. So what is what is making light shine? Well, you might say, well, the power company. Okay, fine. When you go to sleep and you dream, all of a sudden there's light present. What is making that light shine? Where is it shining from? How is it shining? Well, you can't say. I mean, it's not like you can say, you can come up with some bullshit. You can say, the dreaming consciousness generates an image, blah, blah, blah. All of which is gibberish because we don't know what that actually refers to. And yet, somehow, the light still shines. It appears. It's actual. It's an actual experiential presence. So what is doing that is also actual. Or let's say the way in which that is being done is an actuality, and you are that actuality. You are this entire system that is all this, that is doing all this, and that is being done. I mean, it's a closed system, let's say. It's doing itself. And you can best come to understand this system through feeling its actuality, through being it, through immersion in the presence of the actuality of experience. And you will very readily discover that it is completely beyond concepts, completely beyond analysis, and yet it is accessible and it's actual because it's right here and you are already completely engaged with it. With profound intelligence, with profound awareness, that's intrinsic. It's not like you need to churn up some kind of intelligence or awareness, sort of squeeze it out so you can. It's already it just shows up. You can't stop it. In fact, right? So you just again, it's a matter of relaxing into that which is already spontaneously occurring, and it by its very nature is profoundly revelatory. It by its very nature is profoundly communicative and evocative. And it, by its very nature, reveals itself, with profound subtlety and intelligence. That's a given because that's part of its nature as well. It's part of your nature because that's ultimately what you are.
So I guess to stick with concepts, since that's all I know right now, to not try to differentiate between the outside and the inside as much.
Well, notice that where does the outside show up? Here in your experience. Where does the inside show up? Here in your experience. So you can differentiate all you want, but just notice that there's not really that much of a basis for differentiating, because here is here, and then you start dreaming, and when you're dreaming, where's the outside in the dream? Where's the inside in the dream? You wake up and you get that it was all inside or all outside, but when you're dreaming, it doesn't seem to be so. So again, this sort of seemingly firm demarcation between outside and inside turns out to be rather subjective and rather sort of defined into existence by how we hold it to be. I mean, all you can really say about any experience is it's experientially present, and all experiential presence is identical, right? So you see a light supposedly outside you, it has an experiential presence that's undeniable. You think a thought that's supposedly inside you, it has an experiential presence that's undeniable. It's the same experiential presence, right? So it's a matter of sort of relaxing into the common denominator. We're very used to drawing distinctions between this and that. It's a matter of not denying those distinctions, but relaxing into the common denominator that all those distinctions exist in. For example, color. You may be very sensitive to color, and you may be able to differentiate. Oh, I see red, I see blue, I see green, I see all these different colors. They're very different, different shades, and so on. And you can catalog them all and everything. But they're all vision. So vision is the common denominator that all of these apparent colors consist of or exist within. So if you explore vision, you explore something that undercuts and includes all color differentiation. Whereas if you're only exploring colors, then red excludes blue, say, and blue excludes red. So you're dealing with it on an analytical level, which is very non-inclusive, very differentiated.
Thank you.
So, Peter, along that same line, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. The reification of things as seemingly qualitatively different.
Mm-hmm.
I see something that I want, it seems to hold some meaning, some appeal, and I think that is truly, whatever the desirable quality seems to be out there.
Seems to be, sorry?
Seems to be out there.
Right.
And it's the opposite of the one taste. It's like multi-taste.
Right.
And today, that was actually arising today as I was riding up on the train. So I can't, change it. All I could do was observe it.
Right.
Like, again, going back to the Longchenpa books, where he again and again is saying, just rest. There's no effort. There's no cultivation of good qualities. He refutes all of that, suggesting or recommending just to abide in that field, or whatever he calls it, which is complete right from the beginning in and of itself.
Right.
Moments of intimation of that arise, but it's not consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Friday, I'm going to meet with Lama Tarchen, who's the Dzogchen master, and I'm going to request being allowed to be in retreat up on his property. I have a feeling that it may not, because I'm doing as best I can, that very simple practice of just being, abiding, which I can do. It happens more vividly, but he may say, well, if you're going to be here, you need to be doing a sequence of visualizations and so forth. I guess that's sort of a separate issue, but let's just stick with that for the time being. I mean, and I've asked you this before, am I deluding myself thinking that I can be doing this practice, or some would say I need to generate merit, need to do Nundro and all this stuff. I'd rather not do that.
Right.
I'd rather just continue on the track that I have been.
Well, clearly you have sufficient merit, or you would not even recognize the value of Longchenpa's books, for example. If you can look at that book, even if you don't understand it profoundly and intimately, if you can sense that there is value there, and even sense to some degree what that value is, that's an indication of capacity. That's an indication of merit. So, again, it's all a matter of working artfully with what you have, rather than trying to aspire to something that you think you should have. So, for example, if you're working with the Longchenpa books, just stay with the sense that they are valuable and try to be with what that value is. Try and find what that value is. I don't mean intellectually or analytically, but just intuitively, in any way that you can. Try and sort of hone in on how do I know that there's value here? It's not just that I've been told that this book is valuable. In some sense, you actually sense it. In some sense, you have a knowing that there is something profound here. And that knowing is a very deep contact with actuality, because only actuality can recognize itself.
And I'm getting this from different sides. I mean, my friend Rigsden is telling me I need to practice in a certain way, and I shouldn't be analyzing or.
Yeah, but it's too many cooks. If you're going to be going to ask different people's advice, you're going to get different advice.
No, that's what I have an intuitive sense. I have some internal compass, some intuitive sense of direction, and the Tibetan thing is so complicated and I'm not really. That's not what's being called for in my heart right now.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I just want to keep it simple.
Yeah.
And basically, my practice is just what's really true.
Well, that's a profound practice, and especially if it resonates with you, if you feel the truth of that to any degree at all, then that's powerful. My advice would be to really trust that, stay with that. Don't doubt it or second guess it or think that maybe you need to consider other options. Just stay with that. Just trust that. Trust this profundity. What the nature of actuality, the nature of reality is, in one sense, it's elusive to the extreme. It is subtle to the extreme. So it's no surprise that as you approach it, it seems elusive, because its very nature is elusiveness. You are learning to rest in elusiveness, which is intrinsically paradoxical and intrinsically strange. So if it feels paradoxical and strange and challenging as you approach this, there's no surprise. That's a good sign. That means that's the spore of what you're tracking. See what I mean? That's a sign that you're on the right track. If you don't know where you're going, then you're going the right direction in a strong sense, because you're not trying to go anywhere. You're not trying to go to some resolution. You're trying to go to that which intrinsically has no resolution, that which is intrinsically bottomless and intrinsically open. So naturally, as you look at it, as you approach that direction, there's not much in the way of landmarks. There's not much, things get, like at my opening remarks, again, confusion is, could be said to be an essential aspect of the actual condition. So if you find yourself getting confused, if you find yourself unable to resolve what's going on, that's a pretty good sign that you're leaving behind all of this diluted, assertions of resolution, diluted assertions of definition, assertions that we know what's what, assertions that we know who we are, assertions that we know what anything is, all of which is an insane veneer of delusion that we overlay over this complete indefinability that is actual.
And I really want to. This past weekend I attended some teachings for, Saturday and Sunday. Rinpoche, Phonso Rinpoche came through, and I had a chance to talk with him briefly, privately. And there's just it's just sort of taken for granted that one is doing certain things, and I find myself almost framing my practice in those terms. I really don't want to do that. I just want to be totally straight. This is what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. If it's not acceptable, then I guess I won't be hanging out, or I won't be formally involved.
Yeah. Again, if you need to be careful if you're associating or flirting to any degree with more formulaic, I'm arbitrarily calling them formulaic approaches, like a Tibetan approach or something or other. Don't be surprised if there's an implication there that you're supposed to be conforming to that in all of its elaboration. So if you don't want to be doing that, then you do best to steer clear of it. In a certain sense, it's really a matter of the old rule of thumb. You can't please all the people all the time. You can't get along with a Tibetan path and a intuitive path, and you have to kind of pick and choose. You have to kind of be somewhat selective. And if you feel strongly that you have an actual intuition that is powerful, that you want to pursue, you would be wise to pursue it single-mindedly and more or less isolate yourself from influences which claim that that's an error. Because from their point of view, it is. But there's many, many, many points of view, each of which thinks all the others are in error.
Yeah, no, that I've really seen that. And I think I have enough of a sense of the bigger picture that I can really trust it. I more and more.
Good, yeah. My sense is your intuition is valid. My sense is your insight is powerful. And I think you can get a great deal of mileage out of pursuing it. But again, you will do it best in isolation. Not necessarily literal isolation, but an isolation of influence or of being advised from within the frameworks of other philosophical systems, which may not validate your approach, even though it may in actuality be perfectly valid.
Yeah, and I don't even bring it up. It's just when I was talking with Rinpoche and then somebody else, the fellow was orchestrating the teaching, and he said, "Oh, very good to do." He didn't even ask me what I was doing. He said, "Very good to add these visualizations," and just almost like it was just assumed I would naturally wish to take that on. Which
well, that's their standard path, though. That's their prescription for everyone, is to follow the tantric path, and you do the nandro, and you get the initiations, and you do the visualizations and all. It's the assembly line that they apply, which is fine within it as far as it goes within its system, and it may or may not be effective for some people, but it's not the only viable mode of approach. And in fact, the Dzogchen mode, which Longchenpa teaches, explicitly repudiates all of that as being essential. It doesn't assert that you should not do it. It just says it's completely irrelevant whether you do it or not because nothing is actually being accomplished by that.
It states that very clearly.
Yeah. Sure. But again, the main thing is I would suggest for you to not second guess your primary inspiration. I mean, sort of find your North Star, find your compass point of north, and just stay oriented to that regardless of other recommendations, implicit or explicit.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I guess that's it then. Thank you.
Sure. Just a second.
Just a little bit ago, we were talking about outside and inside, and I imagine there's other dimensions of space that we probably try to quantify or figure out where we are. But could you say a little bit more about the different aspects of outside and inside?
Well, outside and inside are just two examples of different ways we orient ourselves or try to orient ourselves within our experience. And there's many, many, many aspects of dimensions that we use. Outside and inside are some of them. That, of course, correlates fairly closely with subjective and objective. Then we had all these different degrees of density. So there's sort of dense experience, and then subtle experience, and then finer experience, and then very, very fine experience. Both outside and inside we can find that. And then there are endless there's the dimensions of the different sense fields, each of which is qualitatively very different. You can effortlessly differentiate vision from hearing, but you can't say exactly how you do it. Light just has a different sort of a dimensional presence or quality, let's say textual quality, experientially, than sound does, and so on. So, and thought likewise has a different sort of a textual presence, let's call it, and so on and so forth. But again, there's endless ways that we classify and subclassify and differentiate within our experience. But what's interesting is to look at the fact that all of these differentiations are ultimately arbitrary and ultimately have a common denominator which undercuts them. And as we approach that common denominator, we also discover that all of these various differentiations are actually not so hard and fast, are actually not so obvious. What we thought one thing clearly is, and we compare it to another thing that seems to be clearly what it is, we discover, well, in actual fact, it's not that way. Things are a little fuzzy, things are a little shady, things are a little unclear, things are a little murky in terms of exactly what they are. Are they exactly this way or exactly that way? And so all of experience on closer examination tends to converge into an actuality that is intrinsically unclassifiable. And yet all of these obvious superficial modes that we can so effortlessly classify are seen to exist within this fundamental condition, within this substratum of unclassifiability, like we talked about earlier with color. There's all these different colors which are clearly and obviously differentiable, but they all exist solely within the field of vision. And the field of vision itself is a little subtler. What is that? What is vision? How does that work? Well, it's the presence of light in consciousness. Well, what does that mean, presence of light? What's light? What's consciousness? So again, we're just sort of throwing bullshit around when we claim to have a handle on what this is. And yet it's actual. It's right here. It's undeniable. It's completely self-evident. But exactly what it is intrinsically difficult to pin down. And then so we have all the different sense fields, all of which are aspects of experience. Okay, great. Experience. What's experience? Well, that starts to get murky as hell. Again, it's completely obvious. It's very explicit. Yeah, experience is right here. This is real. This is experience. Okay, cool. What is it? How is it? Where is it? And it's like stepping off a cliff into nothingness. You can't answer these questions.
It seems once take the idea of color, for instance. Once you just sort of get beyond a definite color and get into what you call a field, you're already off and running.
Yeah, and that's another kind of dimensionality. That's its own kind of dimensionality, which in a way transcends or includes the dimensionalities of color, right. each range of color could be said to be its own dimensionality, and so on. So you end up with these sort of nested dimensions that have greater and lesser degrees of profundity, greater and lesser degrees of inclusiveness, and so on. So the whole thing, again, just gets really squishy and murky and unresolvable.
Well, you did say something about there's something common about this, and I suppose is what common is just the fact that we're experiencing or we're orienting toward. I mean, that's about all we could really say.
Yeah. Well, again, this whole notion of orienting with an experience bears a lot of attention because we do it effortlessly and we do it very profoundly. We're very good at orienting within our experience. Again, superficially, like we've been talking about with inside and outside, subjective, objective, self and other, all of these various different modes that seem very self-evident superficially. But the more we explore this orientation, the more clear it becomes how arbitrary it is and how we're orienting within something that is itself intrinsically not oriented. What's experience oriented to? You can't find some non-experience that experience is oriented to. It's just so experience ends up being this sort of absolute actuality that is completely a question mark as to where it is, how it is, And if all our orientations are within experience, are relative to each other, and relative to experience itself, and experience itself is not orientable, that unorientability actually translates down the scale to all of the supposed orientations we think we're making, and they turn out to be just hot air. It's like in a dream. You can be dreaming that you're walking down a street, and when you're walking down a street, the you is inside the body that's walking down the street, and the other is outside the body. But then you wake up and you get, no, there was no outside there. There was no inside there. It was all inside the dream, which was in me. That's self-evident, but you can see it's an ambiguity there. It can seem to be one way, and then it can seem to be another completely different way. And how does that happen? So is it really either way? It raises the question that all of this orienting, all of this self-evident holding things to be this way or that way is really just bravado. It's really just unexamined superficialities.
Yeah, I mean, once you start looking at what what's really going on. I mean,
Yeah.
well, you're not going to find what's really going on, but I mean,
Well, you find
you
it, but you can't. But it doesn't resolve into an it.
right. But once you start asking those kind of questions, some of the holding just falls away.
Yeah, of course, and that's really the point, is to examine the things that we just take for granted and assume are the case unexaminedly. When we examine them, we begin to notice, wait a minute, there's some shades of gray here. It's not quite as clear and obvious as I'm used to thinking it is. There's some subtlety here. There's some nuance. And in that there is an opening, in that there is an invitation to orient to this astounding presence more subtly, more multidimensionality, more actually, rather than just orienting to it very superficially and heavy-handedly as we may be used to doing. Well, the meter looks good over here. The meter looks good. So if it is, it's on their end.
I have a question.
What I'm seeing here on the meter is what's going out to the internet. And the
Where's
meter
that
looks very
question?
stable and consistent. So if it's crapping out, it's somewhere on the online
I don't
end.
know why it keeps doing that. I had a question on
Technical difficulties.
Question from the internet. Are each of us on this trip alone?
Well, that's sort of... Is each of us alone? Well, if there's an each of us, then it's not really alone. But semantics aside, that's a very good question, and I invite you to look and find the answer for yourself. Find out how many presences there are in your experience, and find out if there's anything other than your experience. I think if you look at your experience, you will find one presence. I think you will find one observer of your experience, and I think you won't find any other observers of your experience. And you won't find anything other than your experience for any other hypothetical observers to be observing. So in short, there may or may not be other beings, and they may or may not be seeing experience, but it has nothing to do with you, and you can't address that empirically one way or the other. So it becomes just a philosophical question, and you can, since it's just philosophical, you can make up any answer that entertains you. I mean, empirically, you are the sole inhabitant of your experience. I mean, try and find anyone else there. Try and find anyone else looking over your shoulder, seeing your experience with you. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the old sort of phrase, "Walk a mile in my shoes," kind of intimates that. It's how are you going to do that? How could I walk a mile in your shoes? How could you walk a mile in my shoes? How can you see what I'm experiencing? No way. It can't be done. Because I'm the sole inhabitant of my experience. And if you could see my experience, it would be your experience. So it would still be your experience alone.
Back to the dream. After a lot of our talking about outside and inside and distinctions, I was stumbling earlier when you said, it's really here, it's self-evident. And I was thinking, really? Because at this point I'm not sure about anything. But it seems to me that it doesn't make sense to want to nail down whether the dream experience is fundamentally different from our waking experience. But it's a matter of possibly degree or intensity or dimensions, but there's no need to want to get hardline about that.
Sure.
And
again, nothing is resolvable, so you couldn't answer that question even if you wanted to. You will never find precisely what the dream experience is. It cannot be pinned down. It cannot be hit on the head. You can't say, yes, now I've got it. The dream is exactly this. That'll never happen. And then here's this experience. It's completely obvious. It's explicit. It's undeniably actual. And yet, what is it? You're never, ever going to be able to answer that question. And if you can't tell what it is, you have no basis for saying that something else is like it or not liking it, because you don't know what it is in the first place. So it's like taking two question marks and saying, are they the same or different? Well, they're question marks, so I don't know. Empirically and superficially, we can say, well, gee, in a lot of respects they're similar, in a lot of respects they're different, and blah, blah, blah. But again, that's all very vague and generalizations and hand-waving. If you want to really be more precise and answer the questions, the closer you look, the more it becomes clear that there is no actual basis for answering that issue, addressing it one way or the other, because, again, you cannot resolve what these conditions actually are. So they remain question marks. They remain indeterminate. They seem to be what they seem to be superficially, but when you look closer, it gets vaguer and vaguer, less and less precisely defined or precisely obvious exactly what it is or how it is. And yet, it's an undeniable and self-evident actuality. I mean, this gets back down to what we were talking about earlier, that even though you can't say what your experience is, even though you cannot conceive of your experience or analyze your experience, you are already and intrinsically fully engaged with your experience with a high degree of awareness, intelligence, engagement, interactivity, and the fact that it's wholly irrational and non-conceptual is just an observation. It's neither here nor there. The only real surprise there is we may be used to thinking we can have some degree of intelligent analysis of our experience, and I'm asserting that on close examination you discover that's not the case. But that proves not to be a problem in the least, because again we are fully engaged with our experience very directly by direct engagement, irrationally, non-conceptually. So, in other words, even though you don't know what life is, you are living it. It's a done deal. It's ongoing. It's an actuality. It's happening. You are completely in your life. You are completely living your life, even though there's no way to say what that means or how it's happening or anything. And even though we have a mind that likes to pretend that it can say what's happening and think what's happening within that milieu, which is fundamentally open-ended.
How does science relate to this? Science, the material world, and this idea that the only things that you can reproduce and to a certain amount predict are real. Is that the biggest illusion of all, or is there some place for that?
Science is a game structure. Science is an investigation of reality. It hampers itself to whatever degree it imposes rules, game structures, for example, repeatability and such, which is such an obvious fiction. There is no repeatability. No, exact conditions are not repeatable. Nothing happens twice. Everything's a one-off. This is self-evidently the case. So for science to pretend otherwise is to create, an elaborate game structure that sweeps obviousness under the carpet, and so on and so forth. But science is a genuine and well-intentioned attempt to investigate reality, which I certainly applaud and recommend. I just recommend investigating it where it exists rather than insisting on investigating it at a remove through all of these rules and with all of these restrictions of having to have hypotheses, having to have repeatability, having to have, peer review. I mean, all these various sorts of things which basically just narrowed down the field into absurdity. So it ends up, science is looking at these tiny, tiny, tiny portals of actuality, whereas each of us directly has engagement with the full field of actuality. As soon as you let go of the rules of rationality and repeatability and explainability and so on and so forth, the more you let go of insisting that things have to make sense, the more fully you can acknowledge your engagement with this actuality, which makes none. But that's not a problem at all. That's just an observation.
Are there limits?
Well, there may or may not be. Again, it depends on what limits mean. This condition is as it is, certainly, and since what that is ultimately undefinable. In other words, you can't get to the bottom of what this is. You can't get to the far end of what this is and then say, okay, now I know exactly what this is. I've got it all. Since that can't be done intrinsically, then you could say you can't know whether or not there are limits. But if there are, there are, and if there aren't, there aren't. And again, that's what do you mean by limits? And that's going to change. That's going to mutate. That can be very, very subtle. That's a line in the sand that you can draw pretty much anywhere you want to, right?
I think I was thinking in the direction of your discussion about practice. What kind of practice makes sense if you want to at least be moving towards some sort of truth, which, if that's not a bogus attempt in itself, or engaging with reality in a more direct or honest way. Yeah. I guess I've been wondering how what we talk about here actually can translate into some sort of more conscious learning.
Sure. Okay. And again, you are cast onto your own best guess. You're cast into your own best intuition, because if you go out seeking advice, you will find it. And you will find endless volumes, reams of advice, and it's all going to be contradictory with the other advice, the other reams of advice you're going to find. So again, you're still ultimately left to your own intuition. If you want to rely upon tried and true recommendations, you still have to pick one. And if you want to go it alone, you still have to. What does that mean? You have to come up with some answer for that or not. So ultimately, you're left to your own genius. You're left to your own best resources. You're left to your own best attempts with your current state, your current condition, your current degree of sensitivity to intuit what is real, what is actual, what is viable, what's meaningful, to the best of your ability with what you have to draw on at the moment, which again is not a fixed quantity necessarily, and will no doubt be developing and morphing and mutating as you continue to develop and morph and mutate and what have you, right?
Thank you.
I like one of the things that Oscar Wilde said about advice. He said it is always good to pass advice on, and is never of any use to oneself.
It's like a hot potato, right? Get rid of it as quick as you can.
So I was, after work, I took a nap before I came over here, or just laid down, and I was just sort of watching what was happening, basically. And sort of like just trying to let that, whatever that was, sort of download in me as much as possible. But I didn't come to, there wasn't any conclusion. It's just, the download was just like, it's like unknowable. Mm-hmm. It's not going to it's not going to become a meaningful download or something. I'm not going to be able to feel inside of it. And, well, maybe I will to some extent, but I mean, it's just sort of a big question mark.
Yeah.
And then I got up to come here, and I realized that this is sort of this is the same readout as that was.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But sort of like with more attributes, let's say.
Uh-huh.
But this is just as I wouldn't say meaningless, it's just as unmeaningful. Or no, it is meaningful, but it's just as unknowable as that was.
Yeah. As we develop in sensitivity, we get how this astounding profundity, this astounding meaningfulness, is totally unresolved, and essentially amorphous, and essentially what you can call it, infinite, or infinitely multidimensional, or what have you. But it is actual. It is profoundly meaningful, and it is profoundly. It nourishes itself. It feeds on itself, and it develops itself just through its presence, through the download, as you're calling it. And yet it makes absolutely no sense. It's unresolvable. You can't say what's happening or how it happens or what happened.
Right.
But that doesn't invalidate it. That doesn't make it nothing. It's most self-evidently an actuality. It's self-evidently profound and meaningful and revelatory, but not of anything in particular. It's unresolvable. When we're more immature, we insist on things being resolvable. We insist on things being describable. We insist on, well, it's not really anything unless I can see what it is or say what it is. But as we develop a confidence in this actuality, we come to see that unresolvedness is not in the least a problem. On the contrary, it's a hallmark of actuality. So when you're with unresolvedness, when you're with open-endedness, is a pretty good sign you're with actuality, and the more you're with actuality, the more powerful it is, the more profound it is, the more nourishing it is, the more revelatory it is, the more transforming it is, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And you're right, what is happening here is the same thing. The more profound, the less you can say, the less you can pin down exactly what happens here, the more you're getting it, the more you're being with what it actually is. And the more you have resolved it and think we know it is, oh, it was a discussion and we talked about this and that and the other, and the more you can resolve it, the more you can pin it down and follow it rationally, the less you're acknowledging the profound, open-ended, multidimensional, completely batshit bonkers, irrational fact of what this actually is.
Yeah, I thought when I was resting, I thought, I could just stay with this. I don't have to come and listen to this talk because this is the direct thing, so to speak.
Yeah.
But then, but also coming to the talk is this direct thing.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
all the direct thing all the time.
Yeah, there's nothing but.
Yeah.
You never, when you come to see it, you can never leave the download. You can never leave, Shiva Darshan.
Right.
And that's what this is. It can't not be that. And when you see it, when you come to appreciate it, then you get to really enjoy it and open to it and participate in it most directly and most profoundly.
Right. You sort of see it even in the particular, even in the anecdotal.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's nothing but.
Right.
Peter, there was something else I wanted to explore with you. The whole thing about consciousness. I know you talked about this during your spring retreat. In many of the classical teachings, consciousness is put forth as the witness, the principle that knows everything, that experiences. And what I hear from you in my own that in some ways seems like an extra, like a conceptual overlay. What is ultimately real, I can't differentiate. It's just this moment. Not like I can actually sit here witnessing my mind, witnessing everything. It's just the immediacy of whatever is arising in the moment. And Longchenpa doesn't really talk about consciousness as a distinct aspect. He's just saying that basically experience left as it is, uncontrived, unfabricated.
Yeah. Again, classically we're used to analyzing all of these various supposed aspects of this. There's consciousness, there's the self, there's what's experienced. Different traditions have different sort of ways of compartmentalizing and analyzing all of these supposed components of this actuality. But in actual fact, none of these components can be found discretely. None of them exist separately. They're all analyzed into existence through function. So this is present, self-evidently, as experience. And so the argument goes that, well, if there's experience, then there's some experiencing principle. And if there's an experiencing principle, maybe there's an experiencing entity. And if there's an experiencing principle, maybe there's something being experienced. So all of this elaboration of supposedly discrete components that must be involved in this event here, they must somehow interact like gears in a machine or subsystems within a machine to produce this actuality. But all that is logically argued into existence. And the argument arises from the actuality itself. And the actuality itself has no discrete pieces. You cannot find consciousness here separate from anything, or in any sense. You can't find it in any way. It's just an imputation. It's a claim. Oh, there's consciousness. Show me consciousness. There's experience. Okay, let's say what we call experience, but you can't find any consciousness. You can't find anything experienced. There's experience itself, and all of these supposed components that go into, that function to produce experience are just they're empty claims. They're argued into existence.
So I guess what would be understood as liberation or realization is the absence of fixation on any of the apparently discrete inner or outer phenomena.
Well, absence of fixation on anything whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And not as an achievement, but as a simple discovery that there is in fact nothing that one could fixate on. So it's a much easier thing to achieve than you might think. Absence of fixation is something you would aspire to, would seem like, oh my God, how can I possibly get to that? But the simple and self-evident discovery that there is in fact nothing definable to fixate on is much simpler. And once you find that, fixation solves itself. Because what are you going to fixate on when there's nothing to fixate? There's no points. There's nothing to rest on. There's nothing to lean on. There's nothing to focus on. It's all just this amorphousness, and fixation is done in one fell swoop. But yes, quite so. The way I put it, rather than fixation, although it's essentially the same thing, I would say liberation consists of not holding this to be any particular way, not holding this to be this or that, in the strongest possible sense. So, in other words, letting this be absolutely indeterminate, which is easy to do because it is. In fact, if you want to come up with some determinacy, you have to supply it, you have to provide it, you have to define it into existence. So it's a much less effortful, much more line of least resistance approach to just be with it as undefined, because that's how it comes, that's how it arrives, that's its native condition.
No, it seems then that the samskaras, the habits of mind, are just tendencies to do just that. To label.
Exactly so.
Mm-hmm.
They're tendencies to define.
Mm-hmm.
But they have no momentum. They only exist in real time, and they exist within a field and within a context that is totally undefined. So even though the samskaras may be cranking out their stuff in real time, they're doing it in a context that is wholly undefined, wholly open-ended, and so there's no basis for holding any of that to be actual. It's just an empty mechanism of groundless energy, and you cannot find the samskaras, and you cannot find the samskara producing mechanism, let's call it, or the samskaric energies arising are themselves wholly transcendental, wholly unresolved, wholly undefinable. So the entire system, again, just consists of an indefinable openness.
Which is so much bigger than any of that stuff.
Yeah, and yet all of the stuff is that.
It's arising in that field.
It arises in that field and is nothing other than that field. The samskaras themselves are nothing but unresolvedness. And the energy with which it arises is nothing but the primal unresolved radiance.
Wow.
So that's why the samskaras are not a problem. It's like meditators thinking they need to stop thinking or still the mind. What you're fighting with is the primal undefined radiance of reality itself, because thought is not really thought. Thought is transcendental radiance. So why inhibit it? Who cares?
That is the essence of Dzogchen.
Yes, exactly so. The essence of Dzogchen is absolute, infinite, unlimited radiance.
Non-combativeness with the so-called mental afflictions, because it's all just happening within.
It's all pure transcendental light.
That is so cool. I mean,
it's totally cool. It's the coolest. It doesn't get any cooler than that I can find, and I've looked.
and yet, the mind's ability to generate anything, any type of weird and
it's miraculous.
In the waking state and the dreaming state,
yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It's miraculous. It's miraculous. And that mind's ability is this bottomless, undefined radiance itself. All of that, the mind and its efforts and its productions and its unceasing energy, is all this absolutely undefined, transcendental, intrinsic radiance of the Dharmakaya. And so where's the problem?
The fact that all this is just happening.
Yeah.
And it just keeps, it's the only thing.
Endlessly.
That's right.
It's the only, it just keeps happening, and there's nothing happening, and there's nothing else happening, and it's all absolutely transcendental bottomlessness, unresolvable.
It's just too far out.
Yeah, it's the good stuff. It's the good stuff. I recommend you hang out there.
I was just thinking about this process of seeing that I don't know what you'd call it, seeing the unknowable or seeing the radiance. Yeah. And I was thinking, first I sort of check into the radiance, and then I sort of, once I see that really clearly, then when I'm looking at my sort of normal readout of life, that sort of creeps in there. It sort of like translates up into it.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other ways to do it, but that's the way, I think that's the way I notice I'm doing it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, again, when you come to perceive the actuality of the radiance, which is, I mean, I call it radiance. What that refers to is the substance of what's appearing as experience. There's just this dynamic energy presence that looks like experience. It looks like vision. It looks like sound. It looks like thought. It looks like all of this. Anything that shows up as experience is actually the presence of an astounding, what I call transcendental radiance. And when you begin to notice this actuality, you begin to discover that it's inclusive. There's nothing but that, and even normalcy, even our dullness, even our human personalities, even our sloppy, out-of-control, chaotic lives, and all of that are nothing other than this amazing radiance. And this becomes clearer and clearer and more self-evidently the case. And as this sort of osmosis occurs, as this permeation or transformation occurs, the entire sort of feeling tone, the entire complexion of what it feels like to be alive, what it feels like to be in this world, what it feels like to be in this life, it spontaneously metamorphs into an astounding condition which can only be described as miraculous or transcendental or sacred or what have you. And those descriptions, of course, are pretty paltry and mythological. But the actuality is an actuality, and it is it's a wonderful thing. And this is what is referred to as enlightenment or realization or liberation or all these things. It's simply the discovery that what this intrinsically is already incredible, and we just didn't recognize it. And so it's not a matter of changing anything or transforming anything or leaving something and going to something else. It's just a matter of coming to recognize that what is here is pretty fucking amazing. And it's just so obvious and easy to recognize once we develop the facility to do so.
Yeah, it's like seeing that it's all, first you kind of like go to the good stuff or what you think it is, but then it's all the good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because once you find what that is, when you look around, you go, oh, yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it. And you can't look anywhere where it isn't. You know, the more clearly you come to tune into this actuality as of what it actually is. Yeah.
Yeah, right. You were never out of the good stuff.
Yeah, and you can look back in retrospect and you realize, gosh, I was a crazy person. Here I've been in this amazing situation of, you know, like a light show, and I thought I was in a sucky, pathetic life that I hated. You know.
Right.
Boy, was I nuts.
Right.
Boy, did I have it wrong.
My question is about pattern and then cause and effect. I've heard you talk about that there is, you know, a certain degree of pattern that we recognize, but I've also heard you talk about that as far as cause and effect, there is really no cause and effect. It's more of an illusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so that's sort of an open topic, right?
Yeah. So this comes down to when I want to practice my instrument, my guitar, and I want to get better. I really have a desire to get better.
Sure.
And then I say. It's like, well, geez, does that mean like practicing every day isn't going to get me better? Like that's kind of an illusion. So maybe is there a way I can get better like without practicing? You know, it's like, do I really have to be putting all this time in?
Where do I send my money?
Yeah.
You have to sign this contract in blood. Well, the whole issue of patterning is fascinating. Because obviously experience shows up with an intense degree of patterning. You know, all of this differentiation we see, all this color and shape. I mean, we can effortlessly look around and identify a room and lights and chairs and people and all this through pattern recognition. You know, we see these patterns that present as experiential energy, you know, sort of coherent subsystems of groupings of color and vision, groupings of timbre and sound and so on and so forth, to enable us to identify and differentiate all of these amazing patterns that self-evidently appear in experience. So there's obviously a very high degree of patterning in experience. But when we look closer to try and pin down exactly what any pattern is, it starts to get very strange. Because the closer you look at anything, it turns out to be very fractal, and you start going into the details, and there's no limit to how far you go into the details, and all of a sudden it looks completely different. And you essentially leave behind one layer of the pattern and move into a deeper layer of the pattern, and the previous layer of the pattern is essentially nowhere to be found. You know.
That would be the same for like when I think of pattern, I think more of like vision and stuff. But
sure, vision's fine. But any sensory,
but when you talk about like even like with music, if you went into that deeper and deeper, the pattern would be different. Is that
absolutely,
what
sure, yeah, anything. But any experience, it's not just vision or one of the sense fields. Experience itself has degrees of patterning. Now, sometimes the degrees of patterning can be seemingly relatively unpatterned. Like, for example, you close your eyes and there's just all of these seemingly random little flashes of light and patterns of light and what all, right? But then it's actually, even though it's relatively chaotic and relatively unresolved, it's still an incredibly intricate degree of patterning. It's just a different order of stability, you might say. And again, with that as well, you start to say, okay, it seems to be that way when I look at it sort of from a distance or superficially. But then you go into it more precisely and say, well, exactly what is going on? Exactly what is the pattern? And it reveals itself as to be so complex as to transcend actually being what it at first seemed to be. I mean, it's like a fractal. Fractals are a perfect way of illustrating the way patterning works.
I'm not sure what a fractal is.
You don't know what a fractal is. I'll show you on Friday on a computer. A fractal is a mathematical pattern that looks completely different when you look at it at different degrees of scale, and it has absolutely open-endedly infinite ranges of scale. So when you ask, what does it look like? The answer is, well, it depends how you're looking at it, because it can look radically different at different, when you look at it differently. Again, what does my body look like? My body looks like this. Well, what does it look like now? Well, it looks like that. What does it look like now? It looks like that. What does it look like when I'm dreaming? What does it look? So again, you think of the body as one pattern that's sort of there, but how many different ways can it appear depending upon the perspective or the angle of view or what have you, right? Different ways of seeing it. And the range is, well, it's infinite, Suppose I get a microscope and peel off a little tiny chunk of my skin and put it in the microscope. Well, that's my body. What does it look like? It looks like the surface of the moon or something. And then I get a more powerful microscope and I'm looking at cells or molecules, and, well, that's my body. What does that pattern have to do with this? Well, it's the same pattern. It just looks radically different from different points of view. So which one is it? Well, it's all of them. Okay, but what good does that do me? How can I pull that into anything? And the answer is you can't. Even though there's all of this incredibly high degree of patterning within experience, it's not resolvable, which kind of goes back to my opening theme tonight, how experience is intrinsically unresolvable. Experience is intrinsically confusing in the sense that you can't get to the bottom of what anything actually is. Even though superficially and self-evidently everything is very specifically just the way it is, and when you start going into those specifics and getting down to details, it starts to get very fuzzy and very, very shady. Cause and effect is another kind of a superficial patterning. Cause and effect is very obvious when you don't look too closely. I flick this spoon and it flicks over. Why did the spoon flick over? Because I flicked it. Okay, cool. So very simple, right? Obvious. Cause and effect. The flick and then the spoon flips. Why did I flick it? Well, that gets into, the biology of how my muscles work. That gets into where the psychological urges. Why did I flick the spoon instead of taking this cup and smashing it on the floor, as an illustration? Well, cause and effect again. You got to get back into the system and try and trace it down, and it starts to get very strange when you follow it far enough. So you have the sort of the superficial readout of this, and then you start going into, what does that system really consist of, and it begins to get very strange and unresolvable. Or let's take the example of suppose I get in a car, I take the key out of my pocket, I put the key in the car, I turn the key, and the car starts. So why did the car start? Well, because I put the key in it and turned it. And had gas and so on, of course, given. But suppose it turns out I'm dreaming. I don't realize I'm dreaming. I think I'm just getting in a car and driving away. But all of a sudden I wake up and I realize, oh, wow, I was dreaming. So I was dreaming, and I look back in the dream and I think, did the car start in the dream because I put the key in it and twisted it? No. So again, what seems to be one way from one perspective of observation can reveal itself as radically different from another perspective of observation. So again, so we go back to this flicking the spoon thing. It's quite obvious that the spoon flipped because I flicked it, and I flicked it because of my weird psychology and God knows what. So anyway, okay, so there's that. But then why is there even a spoon here? Why is this field of experience here? So what's doing that is really what flicked the spoon. And what's doing that is analogous to the dream. In the example of the car starting with a key that turns out to be a dream. So in the case of the dream, the dreaming started the car, even though it looked like there was a key and the key turned. And likewise, in the case of flipping the spoon, whatever's doing this, whatever this actually is what flicked the spoon. See what I mean? So where's the cause and effect? You see what I mean? It gets very trippy when you try to pin it down. It's not that it doesn't exist, per se. It's just that it's infinitely complex and subtle and multidimensional, so that, again, it just opens into unresolvability. But everything does, so there's nothing too strange about that. There is no aspect of this actuality which is resolvable. There is nothing whatsoever that is real that you can pin down and say what it is or how it is. Nothing whatsoever. So, of course, that applies to cause and effect, that applies to practicing your guitar, that applies to all these kinds of things. And so in practical terms, where does that leave you? So what does that have to do with practicing your guitar? The answer is the same as the answer in the earlier conversation. How do you do it? Well, you do it by giving it your best, by doing the best that you can muster at the time in terms of your...
You're not doing that either, so...
Yeah, well, you can say it, you can claim that, but you're not doing it.
No, because if you're the experience, then what you really are is doing it all.
Okay, cool. So then you are doing it.
You're right.
In other words, don't let the fact that you're not doing it keep you from doing it.
Well, even if that happened, that would be me not doing it.
Sure.
Because I thought I should be doing it.
And sure, you can tie yourself into philosophical knots, but don't let that stop you from playing a guitar.
Okay.
Unless you want.
Either I'm going to play or I'm not going to play is what it comes down to.
Yeah, sure, of course.
If I'm playing it, it's because I'm playing it.
Manifestly.
So earlier in the happier phase of the evening...
happier phase?
Is
this the sadder phase?
It sounded to me, if I can't really reproduce it, but that there really is nothing, there might be nothing to fear from existence.
Uh-huh.
If everything is kind of complete, if every experience is complete the way it is.
Uh-huh.
I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that.
My thoughts are yes.
I mean,
that's right.
I'm talking about the obvious things, you know.
Obvious and unobvious, it's inclusive.
Well, illness. I'm kind of a running
Nothing to
hypochondriac.
fear from illness.
Okay.
Illness is complete. Nothing to fear from death. Death is complete. Because there's nothing to be gained or lost. This that is happening here is what is always happening. And it always looks different. So here you are, you're healthy, I suppose, and that's what this looks like. When you're sick, that's what this looks like. And after you're sick, you will be healthy or you'll die. And then that will be what this looks like. But this will still be this. Just because this looks different, it doesn't gain or lose anything. So this looks like this right now, and in a little while maybe you're going to go to sleep, and then this will look radically different. But it'll still be this. It won't have lost anything just because you've gone to sleep. The entire world will have disappeared. Your body will have disappeared. Maybe a new world will appear and your new body will appear in a dream.